You know, with each day that passes, I keep hoping that studios, publishers, and developers will just learn to accept their failures, to just be transparent, honest, and take it on the chin whenever their games fall below expectations. And well, today is not that day, as you will learn from today's video, because you see, a former Bethesda dev who worked at Starfield as the lead quest designer, Shen, recently stated that following in an interview that a large section or growing section of the audience is becoming fatigued at investing 30 plus to 100 plus hours into a game, and that shorter games are seeing a resurgence as a result. And of course, Shen is obviously responding to the whole situation regarding Starfield and why it hasn't really had the same staying power as something like Skyrim or Fallout 4. Now, I normally don't want to engage in drama, nor do I want to fan the flames of anger, hate, or resentment, but sometimes someone says something that I just flat out disagree with, to such an extent that I have to vent about it, and this is one of those times. So please understand me when I say that I personally have nothing against Shen, but man, like I like to say here in Sweden, Will is biking in the bathtub with this one. But before I continue, it's only fair to give some wider context to what he said. From looking at the breakdown that PC Gamer wrote, he started by saying, "I'm sorry, I'll say that. I'm not personally responsible, but part of what happened was the success of games like Skyrim and Fallout 4, these really big titles that you can pretty much play forever. There's still a lot of people who play Skyrim, and even after all these years, and the idea of these evergreen games that you could just sink thousands of hours into that hit the industry. Before, it was MMOs for that. World of Warcraft, there are World of Warcraft superfans who will never leave that game, and then all of a sudden, games like Skyrim and other open world games really hit their stride with enough content to get past the tipping point of you can play it almost forever, and so that became the big trend that hit the game industry. And then he also brings up the rise of difficult third-person games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, as well as Minecraft, a game which adds on tons of content that's not necessarily meaningful. The net result is supposedly that a large section or growing section of the audience is becoming fatigued at investing 30 plus to 100 plus hours into a game, like we see in the article here. But again, I have to strongly disagree with this notion. I don't think it's a growing section of the gaming audience at all. People still cling to Skyrim and Fallout 4 like no tomorrow, yet other games are finding an audience willing to give hundreds of hours or even thousands of hours to a game, despite the existence of these games. I mean, just, of course, look at Baldur's Gate 3, a game that, while having a lot of side activities to do, is still a relatively tight experience, and you can blast through the story going from Act 1 to Act 3 in the span of a couple of days, if you want to. The thing that makes people play Baldur's Gate 3 so much, for example, is the extreme amount of characters, quests, and optional content that's out there in the various zones. Add on to that it's a game with an absurd amount of outcomes, and you end up with a recipe for success. And of course, let's not forget about all the mods. Then we have Elden Ring, a game that, alongside Baldur's Gate 3, has been lauded as one of the best games ever made. It's filled to the brim with content, that being quests, optional areas, tons of optional bosses and items and so on, and it's just brimming with content. The same could be said for Monster Hunter World and the upcoming Wilds, The Witcher 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Red Dead Redemption 2, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and so many more games. These are all games that you could sink over 100 hours into without even blinking. You see, the mindset that people aren't looking to spend 100 hours in a game anymore is inherently flawed, because it seems to go by the assumption that people don't have the time or don't want to put in the effort. But that's not how this works. The reason why you put hundreds of hours into a game isn't because you're planning to. Well, maybe some of you do, but as someone who creates content on a daily basis surrounding games, and as someone who reads hundreds of comments and articles each month, I know for a fact that most of you watching don't mean to put in 100 hours into a game. It just happens. Games that do this, especially big-time RPGs and single-player games, are regarded highly because of their inherent ability to transport you to another world. The game, for a lack of a better word, sucks you in like a black hole, and you don't even notice it in a way that I'd almost call perfect immersion. The thing is, Starfield simply never had the ability to do this to most players. Just a few examples from the top of my head: the repetitive map layout, the lifeless NPCs, the stale dialogue scenes, the unexciting combat, the constant loading screens, and the lackluster story are just a few of the many problems that Starfield has. Like many others have said before me, Bethesda's game design is simply outdated, and for some reason, people who have worked at Bethesda or who are still working there refuse to face the fact that their game just didn't live up to the standards gamers have built up throughout the years. And again, nothing personally against Shen. The guy was lead writer for Fallout 4's Far Harbor, so he's probably pretty good at what he does, but his explanation of the whole AAA slump we find ourselves in is simply flat out wrong. That said, I think he was mainly speaking about Starfield here. Still, I also think his perspective sort of mirrors that of the rest of Bethesda. Maybe it's because of Todd Howard, maybe it's the entire company or some other executive, but this mindset is very reflective of how a lot of AAA industry giants are thinking, that it's not their products that are the problem, it's the consumers, aka you and me. Because of our changing interests, because of our standards, they can't pass off garbage anymore and they have to step up their game. Now, to be fair, Shen does bring up a fairly short game to prove his point, Mouthwashing, a game that was short and concise, saying that if it was longer and had a lot of side quests and other content added, it wouldn't succeed as well as it did. And I agree with that point, but I'm not sure how it applies to something like Starfield, which was marketed as Bethesda's biggest and boldest game yet. The problem, again, isn't the amount of content itself. It's the quality of it. That's why a game like Baldur's Gate 3 has been celebrated to such an extent. Not only is it overflowing with content both at launch and post-launch with free updates, the quality of the content itself is outstanding, and you can actually both see and feel the effort the people at Larian put into the game with every hour you play. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Starfield. It's a fairly copy-pasted and lifeless game that only a select few gamers will put hundreds of hours into. Most don't, because it simply isn't engrossing enough to stand side by side with the previously mentioned games. In any case, I didn't mean for this video to become a long rant, but I really think ideas such as this can actually be harmful in the long run, because all of a sudden, instead of actively looking at evolving and making better games, publishers and studios will take ideas like this seriously, and suddenly we have shorter games with just as lackluster content, which literally nobody asked for. Again, the solution is to make good, high-quality, handcrafted content and stick to what works. Gamers want engaging gameplay, characters, dialogue, and stories, which unfortunately Starfield simply didn't deliver. Now, I would say that this was only my opinion, but if you head on over to the gaming subreddit, it's obvious that most commenters disagree pretty heavily with Will here. The user Cremento says, "The entire main questline of Starfield is based on restarting the game several times and doing the same stuff again and again. Is it really a problem with the number of hours?" OrdinaryFoot7620 says, "Almost every quest, loading screen to ship, loading screen to next planet, loading screen to planet surface, run 1,000 meters, fetch a thing, now go back." Mephisto's Ghost has a staggering 20,000 upvotes on his comments, saying 100-hour games that are bloated with filler aren't fun. Same for 20, 40, 60-hour games. Games that have interesting and compelling characters, stories, and quests are always interesting, reflecting my sentiments that I mentioned before. SG Tabin 173 says, "People are getting fatigued with 100 hours of bloat, Will." And these comments just go on with people essentially echoing my thoughts before. These comments got me curious though. What do you, my viewers, have to say about this? Do you agree with Shen? Are you getting tired of putting 100 hours into a game? Or would you still gladly put that amount into a game if its content is engaging and good enough? As always, let me know in the comments below, and just in case I have to say it, never ever resort to bullying. You may disagree with Will, like I do, but we can still have a respectful discussion with each other. Thank you to all of my Ensven squad members for supporting the channel as always, and have a great day. This has been Mr. Holton, signing out.